There are 3 words an avoidant says right before everything falls apart for you. Not 3 insults. Not 3 obvious red flags. 3 phrases so ordinary, so reasonable sounding, so emotionally convincing, that you will not recognize them as the beginning of a cycle designed to keep you permanently off balance. And here is what makes this dangerous. You've probably already heard at least one of them. You probably accepted it. You probably even defended it to someone who tried to warn you. So ask yourself this. Why does the person who claims to need space always seem to need it precisely when you start to feel secure? Why does the one who says they're not good at this somehow manage to pull you back the moment you begin to pull away? Why does someone who swears they want things to be simple always seem to generate the most complexity? And why, despite all of it, do you keep finding yourself back in the same position, waiting, wondering, recalibrating yourself to fit someone who never quite shows up? By the end of this video, you will understand the exact psychological function those 3 phrases serve, what is happening underneath them structurally, and precisely what to do the moment you hear them. Not to play games, not to win, but to protect the version of yourself that keeps getting quietly dismantled every time you don't. Most people approach this the wrong way. They hear something that feels like a red flag. They research avoidant attachment. They identify the patterns, and then they try to respond better, more patiently, more strategically, more carefully. That approach is missing the entire point. The phrases avoidants use before they play you are not manipulation tactics in the deliberate, calculated sense. Understanding that distinction is critical. A deliberate manipulator knows what they're doing and has a desired outcome they're consciously engineering. What avoidants do is something structurally different. It is automated emotional self-protection that produces the same result as manipulation without the conscious intent. This matters because it changes what you're actually dealing with. You are not dealing with someone who is strategizing against you. You are dealing with someone whose nervous system has developed a set of linguistic and behavioral patterns that regulate their anxiety at the cost of your stability. The phrases they use are pressure release mechanisms. They relieve internal tension for them by redistributing that tension onto you. And when you don't understand that mechanism, you absorb the tension as though it belongs to you. You begin questioning your expectations, your needs, your timing, your tone. You spend enormous cognitive and emotional energy trying to solve a problem that was never yours to solve. That is the system. That is what is actually happening. And once you see it structurally, the 3 phrases become completely transparent. The first phrase is, I just need some space. On the surface, this is a reasonable request. Space is healthy. Autonomy matters. No issue there. But watch what happens in the cycle. Externally, the request appears. You give the space because you are reasonable, because you respect boundaries. The avoidant decompresses. Their anxiety reduces. And then, quietly, they re-engage, not with resolution, not with clarity about what the space was for or what changed, just re-engagement, warmth, presence, enough to make you feel like things have stabilized. Internally, for the avoidant, the space served its function. It interrupted the intimacy before it reached a threshold that felt threatening. The closeness was increasing, the vulnerability was growing, and the system deployed its standard regulation tool, distance. Once the distance did its job, closeness became safe again, briefly. so they return. For you, internally, the cycle looks like progress. They came back, things feel better, you soften, you reinvest. And gradually, as the closeness rebuilds, the threshold approaches again, and the phrase appears again. This is not a one-time request. It is a recurring regulatory mechanism. And if you don't recognize it as such, you will spend the entire relationship in a loop of brief warmth and repeated withdrawal, each time interpreting the return as evidence that things are changing. They are not changing. The system is simply cycling. The second phrase is, I don't want to lose you. This one is more insidious because it carries emotional weight. It sounds like vulnerability. It sounds like investment. It sounds like the admission you've been waiting for. Externally, it tends to appear at inflection points when you've expressed frustration, when you've started to pull back, when the avoidant senses the distance is becoming real. It functions as a retention mechanism. It gives you enough to stay without them having to give the thing that would actually make staying worth it. Consistent presence, emotional availability, structural commitment. Internally, for the avoidant, the statement is often genuine in the moment. They do feel something when they sense potential loss. But the feeling is not the same as the willingness to change the patterns that are creating the loss. The statement is an emotional release. It reduces the avoidant's anxiety about losing the connection without requiring them to do the vulnerable work of actually building it differently. For you, internally, this phrase lands like an anchor. You needed to know they cared. Now you know, and so you stay. And the cycle continues because nothing structurally changed. The words were real. The follow-through was not. The third phrase is, I just don't want things to be complicated. This phrase is perhaps the most quietly devastating because it subtly repositions your needs as the source of the complication. Externally, it appears when you try to have clarity conversations. When you ask where things are going. When you name what you're experiencing. The phrase arrives and reframes the entire interaction. You were trying to understand the relationship, and now somehow you're the one making things difficult. Internally, for the avoidant, this phrase is genuine conflict avoidance. Complexity, meaning emotional depth, expectation, accountability, is dysregulating. The phrase is an attempt to push the relationship back to a surface level where they feel safe. But the structural effect is that your legitimate needs get framed as a problem. For you, internally, this phrase produces a very specific kind of self-doubt. You begin to wonder whether you're asking too much, whether your need for clarity is unreasonable, whether you're being too intense, too demanding, too complicated, and so you compress yourself. You ask for less. You accept more ambiguity. You make yourself smaller to preserve the connection. That compression is the cost, and it compounds over time. Most people, when they recognize these phrases, do one of two things. They confront the avoidant directly, naming the pattern, explaining the psychology, presenting their case for why the dynamic is unfair. This almost never produces what they want. The avoidant experiences the confrontation as exactly the kind of emotional intensity they are structured to retreat from. The result is more distance, more regulation phrases, more cycling. Or they go silent as a strategy, withdrawing intentionally to provoke a response, monitoring carefully, trying to engineer a shift in the dynamic through calculated unavailability. This also fails. Not because it doesn't produce a response, it often does, But because when your silence is a tactic, you are still organized around them, you are still waiting. You are still measuring their behavior as the metric for your own next move. You have changed the action without changing the orientation. What actually creates clarity is not a different strategy. It is a different foundation. The shift is from how do I respond to this phrase to get a better outcome to this phrase is information about what this person is currently capable of, and I am deciding what to do based on my own standards, not their output. That is a fundamentally different internal position. And it produces fundamentally different results, not because it changes them, but because it changes what you will accept and why. Principle 1. Name the function, not the feeling. When you hear one of these phrases, your first instinct will be emotional, confusion, hurt, frustration, hope. Train yourself to bypass the emotional response long enough to identify the function. What is this phrase doing? Is it creating distance at a moment of increasing closeness? Is it retaining your investment without offering reciprocal commitment? Is it reframing your needs as the problem? Name the function clearly, internally. This is not about becoming cold. It is about becoming accurate. Principle 2. Respond to the pattern, not the instance. A single instance of I need space is a request. A recurring instance at predictable inflection points is a pattern. Respond to the pattern. This means your response is not calibrated to what they said today. It is calibrated to what the pattern has demonstrated over time. You are not reacting to a moment. You are accounting for a structure. Principle 3. Hold your needs as non-negotiable facts when the third phrase appears. The complexity reframe. Your needs will feel like the problem. They are not the problem. They are data about what you require to be in a functional relationship. They are not negotiable simply because someone else finds them uncomfortable to meet. Repeat this internally. A need that makes someone else uncomfortable is not an unreasonable need. It is a compatibility signal. Principle 4. Stop accepting statements as substitutes for behavior. I don't want to lose you is a statement. Consistent emotional availability is behavior. These are not the same category and should not be weighted equally. When an avoidant gives you a statement of investment, your question should not be, does this mean they care? Your question should be, what behavior over what time period would demonstrate this statement is true? If the behavior does not follow, the statement exists for their emotional regulation, not for your relational security. Principle 5. Make decisions from fullness, not depletion. The most dangerous time to make relational decisions is when you are emotionally depleted, when you've been in the cycle long enough that any warmth feels like enough. Decisions made from depletion will almost always favor staying, waiting, giving one more chance. Set your standards when you are clear, grounded, and full. Then hold them when you are not. The version of you that knows what you deserve is the accurate version. The version of you at 2 a.m. rereading messages is not. Here is who you are when you understand this completely. You are not someone who needs to decode every phrase to determine if you're safe. You are someone who has established internal criteria for what safe looks like, and you measure experience against those criteria, not against hope. You don't react. You observe. You don't absorb their anxiety. You name it. You don't compress yourself to preserve a connection that has never fully expanded. You take up your full space and let the dynamic reveal whether it can hold you. You don't seek the admission. You read the pattern. You don't wait for the change. You decide, based on the current reality, this is not hardness. This is precision. The difference between someone who keeps getting caught in these cycles and someone who doesn't is not emotional strength or willpower. It is structural clarity about what the phrases mean and who they are deciding to be in response to them. Zoom out. Every time you have accepted one of these phrases and recalibrated yourself around it, you have been making a trade. You traded a piece of your self-concept, your sense of what you deserve, what is reasonable to want, what a functional connection feels like, for the continuation of a connection that was never fully available to you. That trade does not feel dramatic in the moment. It feels like flexibility. It feels like patience. It feels like loving someone through their difficulty. But accumulated over time, those trades become the architecture of how you relate to yourself. You learn to doubt your needs. You learn to compress your expectations. You learn to interpret inconsistency as depth. None of that is love. All of it is erosion. The three phrases are not just things avoidants say. They are tests, not deliberate ones, but functional ones, of whether you know yourself clearly enough to remain standing when someone subtly suggests you should be smaller. The only meaningful question is not what they'll do next. It is whether you are done making trades.